annual Christmas Eve service. My name is Pastor Jesse Johnson, and we're so excited you come out and join us tonight on this special evening as we celebrate the sending of God's Son. Something happened long ago on this silent night, on this holy night. Something that even 2,000 years later we're still unraveling and discovering. Something that would happen that would forever change the course of human history. The idea that Emmanuel, God is with us. Tonight, on December 24th of 2014, is special also for another occasion. On this very night, 100 years ago to this exact day, the world had been at war for 5 months. Up and down the Western Front ran a zigzag line between Belgium and France and Germany. And soldiers on both sides stood knee-deep in mud and mire. Barbed wire, artillery pocked the landscape. The fields stood cold and barren against them. But still God was at work in ways that only He can do. Listen to this fictionalized account of one soldier's story based on true facts. Private Ernie Williams of the 6th Shot Division awoke to find the landscape had changed remarkably during the night. The temperature had dropped and a fresh dusting of snow had fallen over the parent countryside, transforming the mud and barbed wire artillery plowed fields into a white wonderland. The ground had frozen over, and for the first time in months, the soldiers were relieved of that cold, wet mud which sucked at their boots and clung to everything. Ernie looked over the thin stretch of no man's land that separated him from the enemy. Several thin trails of smoke from breakfast fires wafted lazily upward from the trench. The Germans seemed to be biding their time, taking the breathtaking vision of white men that had descended on them during the night. Ernie recalled the last several days. At Christmas, as Christmas approached, the soldiers on both sides had seemed more and more reluctant to fight. A light-hearted but dark-humored exchange had developed between the trenches. When a shot would ring out from one of the trenches, there would be a momentary pause from the opposite trench, with a yell out, "You missed!" or "A little to the left!" Even now, as Ernie surveyed his own company, the men seemed more relaxed, more at ease, eating their breakfast slowly, and relishing the silence of the freshly falling snow. A little while later, there was a sound of singing coming from the enemy lines. Ernie could not make out the snatches of German words that threaded their way through the barbed wire, but he recognized the tunes. The Christmas carols made him think of father and mother and sisters and brothers and sweethearts gathered together for Christmas, and he wondered if he'd ever see them again. His thoughts were interrupted by a specially rousing chorus of "O Tannenbaum, O Tannenbaum," which sounded more like a challenge. The 6th Shropshire companies responded loudly and proud of their own, "O Christmas tree, how lovely are your branches." And for the next hour and a half, each side would sing in their particular language and listen while the other side would echo. And after they had exhausted every song that they knew, they finished with a flourishing, "Hark, the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinners reconciled." Later that evening, a small evergreen tree, obtained from who knows where, was thrust up and perched on the edge of the German trench, so the English could see the candles decorating the tree. The English responded by hoisting up their own teeny Christmas tree, and for the remainder of the night, 2 trees stood barely 50 yards apart, winking in the darkness until one by one the candles burned out. Private Ernie Williams went to bed that night unsure what the next day would bring. The next morning, Ernie awoke to shouts. He crawled out of his bunk and peered cautiously over the firing wall onto the strip of no man's land that ran between the 2 trenches. Soldiers on both sides were standing and sitting in clear sight of each other. Private Mullins of his own division was slowly picking his way through the barbed wire, waving a white worsted cloth over his head. Ernie cringed, waiting for the crack of a rifle and Private Mullen's body to lurch violently backwards. But instead, when he got there, Private Mullins was met by a German, and they shook hands, and gradually men from both sides began to venture out into no man's land. Together, the Germans and English spent the morning retrieving and burying lost comrades. They posed for pictures together. The English exchanged biscuits and pudding and cigarettes for German ale and kraut and blood sausages. Both sides showed each other's loved ones, pictures of family, wives, and sweethearts. That afternoon, they joined in a giant game of kickball, in which nearly 100 men took part. By the end of the day, each side seemed to have forgotten that they had been killing each other just a day and a half before. They discovered an enemy, and they found men like themselves, with families and sweethearts, wives, children, hopes, and dreams. The Christmas truce of 1914 was a series of widespread unofficial ceasefires that took place up and down the Western Front. Around the Christmas of 1914, during World War I, and through the weekly after Christmas, parties of German and British soldiers began to exchange seasonal greetings, songs between the trenches. On Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, many soldiers from both sides, as well as a lesser degree from French troops, independently ventured into no man's land, where they mingle, exchange food and souvenirs. They perform many burial ceremonies together, often ending in carol singing. Troops from both sides also were friendly enough to join a giant game of soccer, and also for Christmas dinners. For the most part, the Christmas truce only lasted for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, but in some places it lasted through New Year's Day as well. Not surprising, the high commands of both sides were livid with fury. Stern orders were given against fraternizing with the enemy, and on both sides, frontal attacks were ordered. However, despite the orders, soldiers on both sides seemed reluctant to forget the bonds forged through Christmas and restart the hostilities. They simply refused to fight. And when their commanding officer commanded them to shoot their rifles, they aimed high. The high command of both sides had no choice but to rotate the men out and relocate the troops up and down the Western Front. Something had happened that Christmas that forever changed the men who were involved in these profound events. The kingdom of God breaks upon us, and we are left transformed. Like a fresh powder of snow, God is a way of transforming us in our very landscape into something fresh and wonderful and new. He is a way of getting down to those cracks in our soul, those broken places where we least expect Him, and providing an extra measure of His grace. Tonight we celebrate a night unlike any other, when the God of the universe truly became one of us, entered into our violent and hurting and broken world, so that in knowing Him, we might know the Father's undoubted love for us. Please join me in prayer. Dear gracious Father, tonight we celebrate the birth of Jesus, your Son. However, Father, what good is it that Christ came 2,000 years ago if you were not born within us? Father, I pray that for each one of us here, that you would breathe afresh in each one of us. That you would birth in us something new tonight. Lord, be born in our hearts. Come be alive in us this Christmas. In your precious holy name. Amen.